Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God, back with you with the next video in our series, Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Without further ado, returning to Great Expectations. Ah, I caught at the name directly. Miss Havisham's relation. The Matthew whom Mr. and Mrs. Camilla had spoken of. The Matthew whose place it was to be at Miss Havisham's head when she lay dead in her bride's dress on the bride's table. You know the name, said Mr. Jaggers, looking shrewdly at me, and then shutting up his eyes while he waited for my answer. My answer was that I heard of the name. Oh, said he, you have heard of the name. But the question is, what do you say of it? I said, or tried to say, that I was much obliged to him for his recommendation. No, my young friend, he interrupted, shaking his great head very slowly. Recollect yourself. Not recollecting myself, I began again that I was much obliged to him for his recommendation. No, my young friend, he interrupted, shaking his head and frowning and smiling both at once. No, 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 it's very well done. But it won't do. You are too young to fix me with it. Recommendation is not the word, Mr. Pip. Try another. Correcting myself, I said that I was much obliged to him for his mention of Mr. Matthew Pocket. That's more like it, cried Mr. Jaggers. And I added, I would gladly try that gentleman. Good. You had better try him in your own house. The way shall be prepared for you, and you can see his son first, who is in London. When will you come to London? I said, glancing at Joe, who stood looking on, motionless, that I supposed I could come directly. First, said Mr. Jaggers, you should have some new clothes to come in, and they should not be working clothes. Say this week. You'll want some money. Shall I leave you 20 guineas? He produced a long purse, and with the greatest coolness, and counted them out on the table and pushed them over to me. This was the first time he had taken his leg from the chair. He sat astride of the chair when he had pushed the money over, and sat swinging his purse and eyeing Joe. Well, Joseph Gargery, you look dumbfounded. I am, said Joe, in a very decided manner. It was understood that you wanted nothing for yourself, remember? It were understood, said Joe. And it are understood, and it ever will be similar according. But what, said Mr. Jaggers, swinging his purse, what if it was in my instructions to make you a present as compensation? As compensation what for? Joe demanded. For the loss of his services. Joe laid his hand upon my shoulder with the touch of a woman. I have often thought him since like the steam hammer that can crush a man or pat an eggshell in his combination of strength and gentleness. Pip, is that hearty welcome, said Joe, to go free with his services, to honor and fortune, as no words can tell him. But if you think as money can make compensation to me for the loss of the little child, what come to the forge, and ever the best of friends? Oh, dear good Joe, whom I was so ready to leave, and so unthankful to. I see you again, with your muscular blacksmith's arm before your eyes, and your broad chest heaving, and your voice drying away. Oh, dear, good, faithful, tender Joe, I feel the loving tremble of your hand upon my arm, as solemnly this day as if it had been the rustle of an angel's wing. But I encouraged Joe at the time. I was lost in the mazes of my future fortunes, and could not retrace the bypaths as we had trodden together. I begged Joe to be comforted, for, as he said, we had been ever the best of friends, and, as I said, we ever would be so. Joe scooped his eyes with his disengaged wrist, as if he were bent on gouging himself, but said not another word. Mr. Jaggers had looked on at this, as the one who recognized in Joe the village idiot, and in me his keeper. When it was over, he said, weighing in his hand the purse he had ceased to swing, Now, Joseph Gargery, I warn you, this is your last chance, no half measures with me. If you mean to take a present that I have it in charge to make you, speak out, and you shall have it. If, on the contrary, you mean to say, Here, to his great amazement, he was stopped by Joe's suddenly working round him, with every demonstration of a fell pugilistic purpose. "Which I mean to say," cried Joe, "that if you come into my place bull baiting and badgering me, come out. Which I mean to say, as sec if you're a man, come on. Which I mean to say, that what I mean to say, and stand or fall by." I drew Joe away, and he immediately became placable, merely stating to me, in an obliging manner, as a polite expostulatory notice to anyone whom it might happen to concern, that he were not a going to be bull-baited and badgered in his own place. Mr. Jaggers had risen when Joe demonstrated, and had backed near the door. Without evincing any inclination to come in again, he there delivered his valedictory remarks. They were these: "Well, Mr. Pip, I think the sooner you leave here, as you are to be a gentleman, the better. Let it stand for this day, week, and you shall receive my printed address in the meantime. You can take a hackney coach at the stagecoach office in London and come straight to me. Understand that I express no opinion, one way or other, on the trust I undertake. I am paid for undertaking it, and I do so. Now, understand that, finally, understand that." He was throwing his finger at both of us, and I think would have gone on, but for his seeming to think Joe dangerous and going off. Something came into my head which induced me to run after him, as he was going down to the Jolly Bargeman where he had left a hired carriage. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Jaggers." "Hullo," said he, facing around. "What's the matter?" "I wish to be quite right, Mr. Jaggers, and to keep to your directions, so I thought I had better ask, would there be any objection to my taking leave of anyone I know about here before I go away?" "No," said he, looking as if he hardly understood me. "I don't mean in the village only, but uptown." "No," said he, "no objection." I thanked him and ran home again, and there I found that Joe had already locked the front door and vacated the state parlor, and was seated by the kitchen fire with a hand on each knee, gazing intently at the burning coals. I too sat down before the fire and gazed at the coals, and nothing was said for a long time. My sister was in her cushioned chair in her corner, and Biddy sat at her needlework before the fire, and Joe sat next Biddy, and I sat next Joe in the corner opposite my sister. The more I looked into the glowing coals, the more incapable I became of looking at Joe, the longer the silence lasted, and the more unable I felt to speak. At length I got out, "Joe, have you told Biddy?" "No, Pip," returned Joe, still looking at the fire, and holding his knees tight, as if he had private information that they intended to make off somewhere. "Which I left it to yourself, Pip. I would rather you told, Joe." "Pip's a gentleman of fortune, then," said Joe, "and God bless a minute." Biddy dropped her work and looked at me. Joe held his knees and looked at me. I looked at both of them. After a pause, they both heartily congratulated me, but there was a certain touch of sadness in their congratulations that I rather resented. I took it upon myself to impress Biddy, and through Biddy Joe, with the grave obligation I considered my friends under, to know nothing and say nothing about the maker of my fortune. It would all come out in good time, I observed, and in the meantime nothing was to be said, save that I had come into great expectations from a mysterious patron. Biddy nodded her head thoughtfully at the fire as she took up her work again, and said she would be very particular. And Joe, still detaining his knees, said, Aye, I'll be eckervally particular, Pip." And then they congratulated me again, and went on to express so much wonder at the notion of my being a gentleman that I didn't half like it. Infinite pains were then taken by Biddy to convey to my sister some idea of what had happened. To the best of my belief, those efforts entirely failed. She laughed and nodded her head a great many times, and even repeated after Biddy the words "Pip" and "property," but I doubt if they had more meaning in them than an election cry. I cannot suggest that a darker picture of her state of mind. We'll go ahead and stop there for this week. as usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care, and thanks again.